Hello again, everyone. I'm Mark Gelwicks for Gelwicks Tech, and this week we're going to take a look at a new feature that Notion released, progress bars. Now, there's been ways to build progress bars within Notion formulaically, and they were a little kludgy, they were a little complicated. This new feature set that they just released, I think really breaks it open. It's definite proof that Notion is listening to what people are asking for and giving them that capability. So let's jump right in. So when we take a look at, I'm going to do a quick share here so you can see. Share. There we go. So what I've done is instead of just building from scratch, I've gone ahead and created some examples of what these progress bars look like, and we're going to walk through how they function. And the reason why I did that is because there's a couple of different ways that you can implement them. But visually, you can see here, this is a database table that I've embedded into this page. And in this database table, I've got individual records, and each record I've added a number property. In this case, it's a percentage value, and it's just a number property formatted for percentage. But what I can do then is I can use a percentage. I can take this and change the property. And you'll see here now that I could actually display this as a bar or a ring. By default, it goes as the number value. So if I flip it over to bar, you see immediately I get these progress bars, including the percentage value. I could turn that off if I wanted to, but I'm going to leave it on for now. I could also do a ring, and you see here the progress for executing the ring. Now, you may be wondering, okay, that's really neat. I like that feature. What types of properties can I use it on? Well, it's only available for number properties, but there are some different variants you can use it for. By default, it works really well with percentages because it gives you that percentage of build. Let's look, though, at how we could also work with this. Now, what I've done is I've used a formula to be able to pull the progress bar into a separate property. And the reason why I want to be able to do that is I want it to be easy for me to make a change. So if I say it's going to be 35%, I can see that progress bar change. Let's change it to 65%. And sure enough, you can see the bar just jump. So we'll set it back to 25 for consistency's sake. So how does that work? Well, if I look at my formula and I look at my property, if I go in and say edit, you can see that I have a formula here. And this is pulling, so it's a number format. It's pulling a value over. So let's take a look at where it's getting that value from. Well, if we look at the formula itself, if I click on the right place, you can see that I have the property of percent, which is the number column over here, is being pulled into my formula column, or my formula property. Because I'm just pulling that value over, Notion's smart enough to say, oh, that's a number. So I'm going to give you a number option to format it. By default, I'm going to choose it as a percentage out of 100, and I'm going to allow you to choose either ring, number, or bar for your progress bar. I like this because it keeps the number visual while also being able to have the progress bar. But it gives me the opportunity to hide the number as a column if I wanted to. Now, again, I could, if I so desired, I could say edit property, I could say show number, and I could have my number that way. I could also do it over here. We'll take this one and we'll say edit property, number format. We'll say it's a bar, and we'll show the number accordingly. So it looks very similar, but it gives me other flexibility. And you're going to see in a little bit why I might want to use a formula rather than just using a numeric column. But right away, I bet you're picturing lots of different ways that you could apply this. But let's take it a little bit further. So because I'm using a formula, I also have this progress ring property. Why do I have another one? Well, because again, I'm pulling a formula, so I'm pulling from this percent property. And if we look at the formula itself, I keep clicking on that. There we go. If we look at the property, I'm grabbing from that percent field, but now I'm going to display it as a progress ring. Again, this is kind of where I think the flexibility really comes in handy because I could have rings, I could have bars, without having to duplicate the percentage field. I can leave that alone as a number. It becomes even more useful, though, as we start to look at some other ways to apply this. Now, one of the things that you always have, everything I've shown you so far has been around a percentage value, dealing off of 100. That's great, but that's not always the way we want to work. Let's say, for example, you're working with a percentage or a process, a series of stages that have to occur, and you want to know how far along in the stages that particular entry has gotten. You want to be able to see the progress of that stage listing. So what I've done is I've created a property that is a choice or a select property. So if we look at its options, you'll see I have 4 stages here, stages 1 through 4. Now, doesn't seem particularly fancy. Let's go ahead and set this to stage 1 and see what happens. Well, when I did that, you'll notice that I got a value in my stage value. I'll give that a little wider. My stage value property. I also got a progress bar for my stage percentage. And you'll notice I got a stage number and a value progress ring. I'm going to talk about these other ones in a minute, but let's walk through here. But let's give ourselves a little bit more information to work with. You can see now that by choosing one of those selected options, by using that choice, all of a sudden I'm generating values and I'm generating progress bars and progress rings. It's all a matter of how you configure it. So let's walk through this. And just to make life easy, I'm going to hide these first bars because I don't need them here and there's no reason to be looking at them in this part of the process. So I have my first record is at stage 1. This value that it's generating, if I wanted to use the percent, which is that default I showed you earlier, all I have to do is get Notion to say what percentage stage 1 equals. That's the formulaic property. So if I go in here and say edit the property, and we take a look at the formula that's involved here, you'll notice the formula is pretty involved. There's a lot of different steps here. But if we walk through it, it's actually not as bad as it looks. So you can see here in the beginning, we've got if statements all throughout this formula. This first one here, if prop stage, which is the stage property here, is equal to stage 1, which is that value, it assigns a value of 0.25 to the stage value column or property. It then goes to the next step. If the if statement is not true, a true result gives you the 0.25. If it's false, it goes to the next part of the if. If prop stage equals stage 2, then it turns a 0.5. If it's stage 3, it turns a 0.75. If stage 4, it gives a 1. Otherwise, it returns a 0. So at that point, I have the ability to go through here and say, this is going to be stage 3. And no, I'm immediately going to get back a 0.75 value. Oh, not too bad. Makes it easy to see what the percentage along the process is. Now, for my demonstration here, stage 1, 2, 3, 4 is kind of obvious. But if I wanted to say new, in progress, under review, or completed, which we can do just for the sake of doing it, it's nice to see these changes. I'm going to change here to say new, in progress, under review, and completed. Now you can see here I've got a problem. I just broke everything. How did I just break everything? Well, remember how our formula worked. Our formula was based on the values in this stage property. So what I have to do is I have to update my formulas accordingly. And we're going to do that across the board because I've broken a bunch of things by making those changes. So I'm going to edit my property. I'm going to edit my formula. And here, instead of stage 1, it needs to say new. And instead of stage 2, it needs to say in progress. And instead of stage 3, and if you're watching in the background, you'll see that as soon as I make the change, I don't even have to save it. Notion immediately applies the change, and I can see if it's working or not. Instead of stage 3, we're going to go to under review. And under stage 4, we're going to say completed. All right, done. So now I have my formula working off of if something is new, if it goes to in progress, it's now 50% done. I get a 50% progress bar. Because remember, this type of structure for the progress bar is reading off, oops, wrong one, is reading off the stage value. Now you'll see here, this formula is a little different. Go, wait, what? Earlier it was pulling the value from a number column, but now you've got a different formula in here. Well, we have to go back to the stage value column for a minute to understand why that's happening. If we look at the stage value property and we go in here and we look at the formula, you'll notice that when we populate the stage value, we are not populating it actually with a number. We're populating it with a text value because it's in quotes. What we can do is, because it has to be a text value that's going in, we can convert that back into a number by using in the property, in the formula, this function called toNumber. By say toNumber and the property is stage value, whatever is in that property, it will try to convert into a number. If it can't, it'll give me an error. But if it can, it'll generate the number. And in this case, we're seeing the 0.5 and the 0.75. So that really becomes helpful to be able to take values that I'm going to supply based on a choice, and a textual choice, especially in this case, and turn it into a numeric value that I'm then going to be able to leverage. So that's not too bad. So I've got this. Let's set this back to new so we can see our progress here. So I've got my stage value, and I've got my stage percentage, or my percentage complete. Now, one of the things I like to do when doing these types of layouts is I'll create the formulas and then I hide them. They still work. I don't need to see them in this particular view, though. I may want to have a view that shows all my formulas. That's easy to do. Just create a view and show those particular properties. But this gives me a much cleaner way to handle it. But now look at this next part that I broke. I have stage number. Well, how is that different than the percentage value? Well, here, if we look at the property, what I'm trying to do is I want to get not a decimal value or a percentage value. I want an actual number to represent each stage in the process. So here, if we have, and I'm going to make these fixes as we go through, if stage equals new, I want it to assign a 1. If stage equals in progress, I want it to equal a 2. If stage equals under review, I want it to equal a 3. And if stage equals completed, I want it to equal a 4. Okay, not too bad. If we go back here and look, you'll see that I have my number values now showing up. So I know that anything that is set to in progress should return a 2. But how the heck is this working? Remember, I showed you earlier that these progress bars, and this isn't specific to bar versus ring, it works in reverse too. But these were based off of a percentage value. How am I getting it to work off of a regular number value? And this is kind of easy because I have 4 values here. But let's say there were 7 steps in your process, and you wanted to show the progress of moving through all 7 steps. Well, now I can't divide 7 evenly to get percentages. It gets complicated. So one of the things that's really nice about the progress bar implementations and progress ring implementations that Notion has provided is if we take a look at how these are being displayed, we edit the property, we take a look at the number, we can tell it how many units to divide that number by. So if we say that it's 7 choices, I could say divide by 7, and then I'll get 7 intervals of progress. If I decided that maybe I only wanted 2, so its first half is new or in progress, and the second half is under review or completed, well, if I say this is 2, you'll notice these 2 circles immediately filled in completely. Why? Because they're in the second half of the process. So I have that capability by using those controls to say, oh, you know what? I really want this to be 4 or 2 or however many intervals I have in my process. Progress bars and progress rings can be extremely powerful when you are trying to determine, are you successfully making it through things? Are you successfully doing things? Now, there are some limitations based on what they've implemented. For example, progress bars and progress rings do not work vertically through records. They only work through properties. So, for example, if I take these properties and if I wanted to say, okay, what's the total progress of this? I can't really total progress it. I can't show that. I can count them. I can count all the values. I can show you which ones are empty or not empty, but I can't give you a progress bar that shows you the total progress of the overall project. It doesn't work that way. There are some ways you could probably do it from a formulaic standpoint where you'd work out some other pass through of data, but it's not an easy thing to do. This is really to focus at the record level. However, what I like about this especially is if we create a new view, and I'm going to create a gallery view just for the sake of doing it. And let's say we talk about records. We'll just call it records. If I choose what properties I want to have, the stage and the value process, you'll notice, and let's get rid of some of the other junk here. I don't want to preview, and this is a good review for anyone who has looked at this with me previously, within the structures themselves, being able to have things like the page content displayed. Well, I don't want the page content displayed. I want the card to be small so it's nice and concise. I want the records to open in a side peek mode. All of those are nice configuration options, especially if you're setting up a view to use on mobile. Now I can look at this right away and say, okay, this one's 3/4 of the way through. This is 2/4 of the way or half of the way through, and so on and so forth. It makes it very easy to have that visual display. You'll notice they're not huge. This is not intended to be a dashboard style tool as per se, because these are at the individual record level. But they do give you that ability to show progress as you're moving through. There are other ways that you could apply this, and I kind of like some of the formulaic approaches that I've seen and been working with myself with some customers. One is to have a process, a stage gate style process, where you will have multiple steps that you have to go through. Let's talk about our step 1 through 7. Well, every time I have a step, I might have, we say step 1, I may decide that I want to capture the date that that step is completed. So I'll have my date format. I'm going to use month, day, year. That's fine. Okay, so I have step 1 there. What I can do is I can do a count. I could put a formula in that totals. Now, I'm not going to build the formula right now because there's a lot of steps, but this is a conceptual piece. I could have a formula that says, look at step 1. If the value is not empty, add 1 to my count. And it will count the number of steps that I've actually plugged dates into. So if we're thinking about this from a project management standpoint, and I have multiple things going through a cycle, as I put the date in for when I complete that step, the system then totals that up and says, oh, you've got 3 dates in out of 7, or let's say out of 6 steps, you're 50% of the way through. I'm going to show a 50% complete value bar or progress bar. That can be really useful when we start to summarize project steps out. We start to summarize components together to get a real good sense as to what kind of progress we're making. And if you think about applying that then on top with other functions such as filters, now you have a type of activity let's say, again, you're keeping a lot of project listings, sequential project listings in this database table, and you tag them by using a multi-select column, something similar to this, where if we add a property in here and we say it's going to be a multi-select, we can give it, let's say this is a design, this is coding, this is editing, and so on and so forth. I can then choose, I'm going to back out that way. So we'll take our property here and we'll say editing and coding. I could go through then and filter and say, show me everything that's got editing involved in it, and see, just based on those progress rings and progress bars, what their overall status is. Are they getting hung up? Is there a step that's behind? That really can empower my overall view as to where things go. The other thing to keep in mind is when we talk about building out these types of databases, I have the ability to create, and I actually went down too far. We're going to go back here. So we're going to use my slash command, and we're going to go down here to where it says linked view a database. And I'm going to take the sample database table, and we're going to say it's a table view. Notice here, I now have two different views of the same database on the same page. Now that doesn't really sound useful, but let's think about these as if they were different databases. I could create a master page with these different linked database tables with their views and their progress bars, and have an overall program view of all the different activities that I have going on. And just at a glance, be able to immediately see what sort of progress has been made across the board. So I want you to think carefully about ways you could use this as you get used to using them. Uh, the simplest way, again, is what I showed you at the very beginning, which is to go in, add a property that's a number, and then determine, okay, do I want to use a bar or a ring? But to make life as easy as possible, I recommend setting it as a percentage. Then if you have a bar, you can just go in and start to plug a number in. So if I take this property 1 and I say it's at 73%, sure enough, 73%, there's my progress bar. Very simple, very streamlined. I have to give them a lot of props. This is a great way to implement something that previously was a little kludgy and very complicated. I've done posts on Gelwix Tech before about how to manually build progress bars utilizing emoji and graphics and formula builds to get that visual representation. And while those are, I would say, a little bit more visually appealing, this is about as efficient as you get in generating something very quickly to be able to go through and say, okay, I want to see how this is working and I want to see how effective it is. So it's a nice touch and it's a nice combination. So I hope this was helpful. I'm going to continue doing these. This just happened to be timely based on the new functionality release that they put out. But if you have topics that you'd like me to dig into or functionality that you'd like me to show, please stop over at Personal Productivity Club and let me know in the Notion Resource Center, or drop me a line over at Gelwix Tech, and I'm happy to bring it up in the next live session. So I hope everybody has a good day and good luck with your Notion implementation.